Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Operations Policy and Planning Standing Committee for October. I want to welcome everyone and start us off in a good way by recognizing and acknowledging both the Esquimalt and Songhees nations on whose traditional territories we live, we learn, and we do our work. Trustees, may I have a mover to approve this evening's agenda? Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Any discussion in relation to the agenda or any changes or amendments to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of approval of the agenda? Thank you very much, trustees. That is unanimous. We have a set of minutes under A3. Again, these are our 16th of September Operations Policy and Planning Committee meeting minutes. May I have a mover? Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Any changes or amendments to those minutes? I had just a very minor amendment, or just I think a correction more than an amendment on page 5 of the packet. The second line of the amended motion, it should read including rather than included. So I think it was just a typo. And so that's the only amendment that I see. Would anyone like to move that amendment to the minutes? Or are we happy to do that as a friendly? Yeah, Trustee Kwan, you're moving that amendment, right? Thank you very much. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment to the minutes? And that's unanimous. All right, so we have an amended set of minutes. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. All right, thank you very much. So do we have any business arising? This is again, business arising from the minutes. Okay, I don't see any. I'm going to move us along. We don't have any presentations to the committee this evening. We do have a report from the superintendent under C1 regarding upgrades to the boardroom and boardroom technology. Superintendent, I'm going to turn the floor over to you when you're ready.
Thank you very much, Chair. On page 7 and 8, you'll see a memo outlining our two-stage approach to altering the boardroom. This alteration is to create a culturally appropriate, accessible, and inclusive learning and meeting space. We recognize that with all renovations, particularly ones that involve older buildings, that surprises happen. So we will be continuing to provide updates and pause work should it get close to the $50,000 that have been allocated for this first stage of the work. The memo outlines in stages how we tend to or are intending to approach this work. And what we've found over time is that the boardroom is not accessible, not an inclusive space, and not necessarily culturally responsive. And so we recognize the need for meeting spaces throughout our district, and we recognize that we are at times required to go outside the district in order to have a space that is inclusive and accessible. And so we're looking forward to being able to move forward, create a meeting space and learning space that is accessible and that is inclusive, and that will, through stage 2, involve upgrades to both the visual cameras and the auditory so that people can be seen and heard. The first stage, though, is intended to be able to have a flexible space. Right now, how the tables are set up are very inflexible, and we find it very challenging to have any type of meeting in there that allows for table discussion, that allows for small group breakout, or for us to be able to flexibly move around things. And so again, as you see in the memo, hopefully it outlines what our intention is in the 2 stages or 2 phases that we are intending to. But again, as we move forward with this in the first stage, when and if it gets close to that 50,000, we will pause work. We will include updates to the board so that you're aware of where we're at. And if necessary, we'll pause. We're hoping that we won't get to that, but we won't continue the work if it gets beyond that 50,000 that is being set aside for the work.
Thank you, Superintendent. I'm going to open the floor to everyone for questions. Again, this is a more informal setting at our standing committees, so there's there aren't time limits for contributions around the table, but I will try to keep us moving as we have quite a lengthy agenda this evening. So Nissa, welcome our VC PAC representative this evening. The floor is yours when you're ready.
Thank you, Trustee Duncan, and through the chair. The VC PAC supports the staff and board decision to upgrade the boardroom, and would like to communicate this out to PACs, given that there has been quite a lot of call for the return to in-person options and hybrid meetings. One thing that the VC PAC would like to offer is on the audio-visual side of things, in terms of flexibility and ability to use different spaces. We have recently purchased an OWL audiovisual unit, which we've had quite a lot of success with. This was a very cost-effective measure. It cost us less than $3,000 for a designated laptop and audiovisual unit. I myself have used them in professional settings in rooms with capacity of over 40 people. And it's been very effective at utilizing the space and ensuring that we have good tracking of the speakers and who's speaking, as well as giving a sense of what it looks like in the room. So we just like to put that forward, and we invite all trustees to attend one of our meetings that we've successfully held hybrid from any of the libraries that in the schools across the district, to increase our accessibility for PACs to participate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nissa. I appreciate that. Yes, Cindy, welcome, the GBTA rep this evening. The floor is yours when you're ready.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that this is happening. Having a number of meetings done in that space, it would be nice to have that flexibility. So again, I'm really glad that this is happening. So I would hate to wait or to have everything perfect as an impediment to have these meetings, because I don't know, I would really like to have the in-person meetings or hybrid meetings. My question is the intention to have in-person or hybrid meetings? Is it in-person or hybrid? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cindy. I think we haven't really gotten to the part of the memo, I think the board wanted to get an estimate of the cost to upgrade the boardroom. We were very focused as a board on the sound and the video as it relates to our public board meetings. The superintendent's memo was very much focused on inclusivity and being able to have a more flexible space for the district, regardless of the need. Of course, the board, we're very focused on the board's needs. And so we want to have a bit of a discussion about what our needs are in relation to the boardroom, and whether the plan highlighted in the memo meets all of those needs. I think one of the questions certainly that I have, and perhaps some of my colleagues have, is just around the order of operations. And so our intention was very much to upgrade that audio and video first and foremost, so that we could have the option of a hybrid meeting to allow folks to both be in person and as well as joining us virtually. Yeah, great question. I think that we've heard from the community that folks want to have that option. And I think it's just about how we execute that and perhaps the order of things when it comes to the proposed works. But Trustee Kwan, perhaps you have a different perspective. And Cindy, does that answer your question that we, as a board, we're looking to have hybrid? Yeah. Okay, great.
I was actually, first and foremost, I did realize after Nissa had said, was talking about the OWL, that the superintendent and associate superintendent had something to say. So I'd love to hear kind of their response to that before I ask my questions.
Excuse me. I'm sorry I missed you. And thank you, Trustee Kwan, for always keeping me on track. Superintendent, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So we are currently using the OWL. The three of us are in one room using the OWL. We've found success with it. So thank you very much, Treasurer Temmel, around this. I think we're happy to discuss sort of the order of operations. We've looked at it from two ways and are interested to hearing feedback from the board on which and why we go in this order. When we do move forward in whichever order we do, we want to make sure that it has the capability to meet the needs of the board and also meet the needs of flexible learning and meeting spaces. With the owl, you can have more than one owl. We also have the audio piece to the owl. So what we're not sure is what it sounds like in a larger room. And so when we do have, whichever order again, but if we have the table structure changed, then we could try the owl in that format. And maybe we don't need to go to the extent of which we've put in the memo around different audio, because the owl is hopefully quite clear. Doesn't always pick up me in the camera, but that's okay. But I think it does have the capacity to hear who is in the room and also to see who is in the room. And so that may be something that we move forward with in the interim. So to answer Cindy's question as well, I don't think we want to wait too long to move into a space that's accessible for and inclusive for other purposes, as well as the board meeting purposes. So Associate Superintendent Arts has a lot more of the technical details that he can answer to.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Okay, so perhaps I will go to my colleague then, Trustee Kwan, and then Trustee Painter was after that. And then we perhaps will have some questions that are technical in nature, and then we can call on Associate Superintendent Arts.
Yeah, and I had a couple questions, and I'll just put them both kind of on the table, and we can answer them perhaps as we come. So my first question was going to be around, you know, the priority of tasks and what we would do first, that kind of thing. But it's also, it's not just between the technology versus the equipment in the room. It was actually around the flooring and with the desks. Does one depend on the other? And is it possible to not do flooring and do the desks? So that was one question. And the second question was just around budget. And I know that you mentioned kind of a $50,000 figure, and you know, where was that budget going to be found? You know, how are we gonna find room in the budget for that cost?
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. I'll turn to the superintendent to allocate those questions as you see fit.
Sure, thank you. So the funds were put aside. They came from the carry forward and they were surplus, and it was part of the pack-up specifically. So it was board approved, and it was approved for this year for $50,000 to be used for upgrades to the boardroom. So that hopefully answers that question. And then with regards to the staging of the work that happens, yes, absolutely. I think like any renovation, when you look, you can start to peel back the different things that you could do within a space. We do recognize the carpet in there is getting quite old and hard to clean and hard to keep clean. But if that's the determining factor, I think we're going to look at what we need first is to ensure it's accessible and flexible. And what we may do is not do carpeting if that's cost prohibitive, and we want to make sure we have the table structure to be able to move the room around. Fixed tables make it fixed audio. And so then we're investing in something that we may not want next year. And that was our worry for the order of operations. But again, I'll pass it to Tom. He's got much more information.
No, thank you. And through the chair, that's correct. The fixed tables currently are carpeted around. And so when they're removed, there will be large patches of carpet and holes that need to be fixed. And so when the carpet, as mentioned, is quite old and it's bolted, those tables are bolted through the floor. So there is going to be some work there. So the recommendation was that we remove the carpet. The hope is that there's actually hardwood below it. It used to be a gym, and we have found that in other schools, but we don't know for sure. And that's why when we look at the stage estimates in the memo, there's a range. But ideally, we find that there's actually usable floor underneath, and the whole flooring doesn't need to be replaced, just some patching and some finishing that needs to be done there. But like with all renos, we won't actually know until we rip that up, and that's why that range was put in place. And as Superintendent Whitten says, if we do find that we are running close to the 50,000 that has already been approved, we will pause and bring that information back. But our hope is to be able to get that all done in that realm of money that we have.
Thank you very much to you both. Next up was Trustee Painter, and then Darren, welcome, our QP 382 rep. You'll be after that. So go ahead, Trustee Painter.
Well, my comment was focused on the process, and I'm very mindful that space, although it's the boardroom for the board, it has so many uses throughout any regular week. And I think it just really makes sense that we optimize the space first. Get rid of the tables that no longer serve an effective purpose, and in fact, maybe a barrier to access in some regards. I would hope that there's some sort of very minor initial assessments of the floor condition, et cetera, peeling up a corner of the carpet, for example, to properly assess what, to the extent possible, what the costs are before we engage. I would hate to think we're 48,000 in and then decide to stop. I think we want to ensure that 50,000 will get us to a definable stop point before we undertake any expenditures. And I'm sure that was already part of the plan, but that was my interest. And honestly, I've felt like the board has had great success having meetings in school libraries with ed policy in the past and everywhere else. So I think the technology has come a long way as far as being able to deliver hybrid in a number of different situations. I had the opportunity to sit in on a VC PAC meeting that was delivered hybridly from a school library, and it worked, to my understanding, quite well. So I think the technology is there to provide us with the flexibility, but making use of that space more effectively is just, it benefits a whole lot more than just the 9 people at the board and staff, of course.
Thank you, Trustee Peter. Darren, go ahead. Thanks for your patience.
Yeah, hi. Good evening. I just wanted to make a comment. It was mentioned that the possibility of that there's a possibility of lifting the carpet up and making do with the original floor. You might want to take a look into the acoustics of the room. It's a large, high ceilinged room, and if with not much to break up the sound from bouncing back and forth, and especially if you're going to a hybridized meeting. You might have some issues with the echo, and although the owl it's amazing, it's one of the best ones units out there. It may still have some issues with that kind of an echo chamber. Just my 2 cents, something to look at.
Thank you very much. Okay, so a few ideas and observations. I mean, I think it would be lovely to be able to keep if there is existing flooring that just needs some repairs, it's certainly easier to keep clean. But that might mean that we need to explore, as Darren points out, some other sort of sound dampening, maybe roof tiles or something else that might minimize the sound. In terms of the order of operations, I wanted to come back to the type of audio and video technology that we're contemplating, and whether or not that is also intended to be quite portable and movable. And if it is, then perhaps we can discuss how we might layer those purchases in sooner rather than later, respecting the fact that either way, if there's a period of time when you're upgrading the physical space, we wouldn't have access to the space during those renovations. So, but just in wanting to kind of go as quickly as we can to be able to start to host those hybrid board meetings. So Superintendent or Associate Superintendent Arts, yeah, if you have any insight that you can share with us, that would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much, and absolutely agree. I think what we would do first is try the owl or purchase another owl, because they do come and you can work them together and see if that works. There's no need to go into an intricate audio visual. We do recognize accessibility includes visually impaired and hearing impaired, just to make sure that people can hear and see our meetings. But the owl, as been mentioned already, has worked well for us, and we want to be able to try it out in a room that we can use. And so we would not be waiting for that. We do have the owl already, so we could utilize that right away. And if we needed to purchase another one, that's certainly less expensive than putting a whole new audio visual in there. Regardless, if we did go down in the future to an audio visual piece, it would be portable, flexible. So that was part of it, is not fixing us into something that's not movable. And we're back where we started.
Oh, I think you're muted, Chair.
Thank you very much. I just was wondering if you could provide a few examples of the type of technology that has been budgeted for in the so far. Like, was it the OWL, and then what kind of microphones or other tech were we intending to purchase for the budget that's set out in the memo?
Yeah, thank you through the chair. So the budget that's set out in the memo is for 12 high quality microphones, which would pick up great sound for people. Our idea is that those would be able to be moved into different areas in the room. Right now it's for wired, but I do believe they have a wireless option as well, which has its pros and cons, as anyone's ever tried wireless things before. And then the high-end cameras at the very high end of that stage would actually be ones that pick up sound and directly go to who's ever speaking and would zoom in. But those would be set in the boardroom and wired in. But the OWL and other technology like that would be portable. And so, like I say, there's a range there in cost, and our hope is to be at the lower end of that. As Superintendent Whitten says, the OWLs can be linked together. And so you can get a larger range of space. And there are sound speakers that come off of them for picking up speaking. So we would try that in the space. Hopefully it would be successful. And this is indicating they've had success with that in libraries and that. So if not, we have other steps that we could do moving along, but we are aware that the sound quality and the visual quality is really important for any meeting or recording of a meeting for people to watch later.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, we appreciate the focus on accessibility. In terms of the physical space and upgrades, what are the requirements in terms of electrical upgrades that might be needed? One of the impediments is certainly to meeting from the board's perspective is the sort of limited number of electrical outlets, like to charge devices and so on. They tend to be along the exterior of the room, and there's one at the front of the room as well as in the floor, but there's not a lot of electrical outlets. So was that budgeted as well within the budget set out in the memo, or what do we anticipate in terms of costs associated with that kind of thing?
Thank you, and through the chair, that's a great question. Well, I'd have to take that away and get back to you. That isn't something that has been explored at this point.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess the only other thing I was wondering was, are we planning to utilize our own in-house expertise and staff to undertake some of this work? That was in terms of like the physical space.
Yes, again, through the chair, yes, we would be using facilities, and that's who has provided many of the estimates here for the work. And depending on the audio-visual purchasing that we'd have to do, we would probably buy that from an exterior company, but our facilities would be involved in installing and working and doing all of that, and the physical work in the space as well.
Right, wonderful. Okay. Trustees, just turning to you now from your perspective. I know some of you haven't had the pleasure to meet formally more than once in the boardroom. But did you have any other feedback that you wanted to provide to the superintendent and associate superintendent at this point, or any direction that you want to give in relation to the proposed works? I know the superintendent has, said to us this evening that she intends to come back and update the board as the work moves along. But is there anything from a board perspective that we want to communicate and make sure happens so that it accommodates our work? Yeah, Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, just to confirm, I think because this is a committee meeting and not a board meeting, I wondered if this information would be presented to the whole board again at our next board meeting, or regular board meeting, or whether it's just an ops, and we'll go from here.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Superintendent, did you have any thoughts about what you were intending to do in terms of the memo and sharing that information?
I'd be happy to put it into my superintendent's report in the board meeting if that works. It would be great to hear from all trustees on their thoughts and make sure that we've captured all the questions.
That sounds good. That would be much appreciated. Thanks, Superintendent. Okay, yeah, Trustee McNally, go ahead.
Thank you. I admit to not really understanding what a hybrid form of meeting is. And just before whoever here can, through the chair, whoever can answer that, I just want to say how really pleased I am to see that great big beautiful table go. If we could recycle it somewhere, because it is a beautiful table, but it is so patriarchal, if you will, in the setup of them and us. I'm just really happy this is going forward. But back to what is a hybrid meeting, and if I can't make it to wherever the meeting is, can I still participate virtually?
Yeah, thanks, Trustee McNally. No, great question. Yeah, the hybrid meeting would allow folks to be participating both in person in the meeting space as well as remotely. And so folks that would find it more convenient to connect virtually through a Zoom link or through a virtual meeting solution could continue to do that, as well as those that can be present physically in the space could also participate that way. So it's a great way to increase even just our partners or families' ability to participate, as well as staff and trustees who would give some additional flexibility too.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Trustee Painter, I think you were next, and then I'll go to Nissa.
I note that it doesn't appear that there's replacement furniture on this list, so I'm not sure if the expectation was to rely on collapsible tables for the time being, which is something I don't really care about as long as it gets the job done. With that, what that prompted me a little further is that I would really appreciate seeing a more detailed budget breakdown, including the options that are being explored around audio visual with the specific features. I think that would help me. I'm generally supportive of making better use of that space, but I'd like to make sure that we're doing it as fiscally responsibly as possible, with as many different demands as we have on the board, on the school budget, on the district budget. I want to make sure that we're doing it as frugally as possible while still getting a decent end product.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Superintendent, do you want to add anything in respect to Trustee Painter's comments, just in terms of perhaps building into your process, providing a more detailed estimate of costs and maybe associating those with what you're intending to procure at the end of the day once you know a little bit more? It sounds like you're given us a range because you're not sure exactly how things will unfold. But is it possible to bring back a more specific estimate once you've done a little bit more of your exploration work?
Absolutely. It's been very helpful to have heard different questions and different concerns and thoughts. And so this will help us line up the budget in order of priorities. And then, yes, we are looking to do this in the most fiscally responsible and frugal way. But then we'll lay it out so you have a better idea of where to from here and how we get there with each of the cost items.
Perfect. Thank you very much. All right, Nissa, thanks for your patience. Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. And just an observation through the chair to address Trustee McNally's comment about hybrid meetings. I would say that the one additional resource that makes hybrid meetings very effective is an effective moderator who can alternate between input from folks who are in the room and input from those who are attending online. So that's just an additional skill set that really helps make the meetings run very smoothly.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, great observation. It will test our presiding officer's skill set. We'll have to adapt, but we're looking forward to the challenge. Okay. Any other questions in relation to the memo before I move us along in our pack up? Okay. The next item is under D. This is a personnel item, and we have our Director of Human Resources here to go over the annual occupation health and safety report. Director Knudsen, whenever you're ready, welcome. The floor is yours.
Good evening. Thank you very much for allowing me to present the report. You have a copy of in front of you, I hope. Just summarizing, there's been a lot of activity over the last year, and the biggest impact has been the more fulsome adoption of the Violence Prevention Program app. So if you recall back the last couple of years, the numbers were slow to start. Then last year, the year 2 years ago, picked up, and then this year have really escalated. So I think it's safe to say that the app is used now more broadly across the district, and that's reflected then in our numbers with regard to WorkSafe claims being reported, because part of the VPP process is to lead the user through the process of actually making a report through to WorkSafe. So that increasing trend is evident in the data. And then aside from that, the overall numbers were actually reasonably good. There wasn't a significant increase. In fact, in most areas, there was a decline. So it was really the VPP that was driving our increases. There were 13 WorkSafe inspections over the last school year, and there were 2 orders as a result of that. The final piece to flag is that the OH&S group has been working with both in school and through the district Occupational Health and Safety Committee to make sure that there's updated processes in place. And part of that was a revamp of our onboarding processes. So now that new joiners, as part of it's done online before they get to the you're now hired. They go through a process where they have to review a number of materials related to WorkSafe health and safety. And we're also, as part of our new VP orientation, making sure that they get a personal one-on-one, because in most schools, it's the VP, the vice principal, that's managing the occupational health and safety activities at the school level. Going in a little more detail, you can see in the table 1 provides the data year to year. And it's, if we look at where COVID was, there's a bit of a spike there, but it's dropped down for most groups, or at least leveled off, the exception being 947. And we attribute most of that to the increased use of the VPP app. And then in table 2, there's the breakdown of the total injuries by type. And as has been the case in all of the previous years, MSI, I can never pronounce it. MSI has been the main driver. Difference this year is the violence reports has surpassed the struck by, which last year was the 3rd as opposed to now being the 4th larger group. In terms of total lost time reports, there were a total of 102 lost time injuries, which is a slight increase over last year. And the 3 leading causes mentioned below. The Violence Prevention Program, because it's now been adopted by most of the schools and is well known, it created an opportunity for us to look at what is the value to individuals using it. And I think one of the initial expectations is that people thought, by virtue of simply recording something, that it would materialize into some action, additional resources, or some some immediate response. But really what it does is it helped us track that there's an issue. It didn't really result in a solution to that problem. And so what the group has done is they've created a beta version, which effectively takes the starting place and separates the report into a behavioral stream or just a pure violence stream. And the behavior stream, so a change in baseline, is where we're able to better direct or support school-based teams to support the employee and the student in terms of making sure that the employee safety plan is correct and appropriate, but also is there an opportunity and a need to amend the supports in place for the students. So that's been a helpful transition. It's currently being trialed in 10 schools. And it's my understanding that about 25% of the reports coming through the updated version are actually using the behavior stream as opposed to just the reporting of an incident stream. In terms of the WorkSafe inspections reports, as I mentioned, there were 13 last year, and there are 2 that actually resulted in orders. Those orders were on the same issue, and the issue was a response by the school to how to address a refusal of unsafe work. There was some lack of clarity around the appropriate process to follow. So once the officer brought that to our attention, we were immediately able to respond, and those orders were quickly closed. So, while it's not in the report because it's just starting over the summer, so it'll be picked up next year, I just wanted to flag that the HR team, the OH&S team, are starting a core review, so a certificate of recognition process, which is essentially formalizing a lot of our processes across the district. And the value of that, in addition to there being the hope of improved safety in our workplaces, the benefit in the longer term is reduced premium costs through WorkSafe. So that you'll see reflected more in our report out to you next year. Any questions?
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Director. I imagine we do have questions. Trustee Painter, did you want to kick us off?
Yes, thanks very much. And I'll apologize right off the bat. I recognize that not all of my questions are a neat fit into human resources, although they're still focused on the information provided. And so I'll rely on the chair to direct my queries where possible. So just to start out with, when I was looking at the pie chart and trying to understand the numbers, I wasn't quite sure what the total is in this case, and what was the source of this data. Was it a specific program or like the VPP, or was it all reports?
So this is all reports that go through WorkSafe. So this information is drawn down from WorkSafe's database.
And how many total did we have?
I should have that at hand. You, of course, asked the one question that I don't have immediately in front of me, and I apologize for that.
And I'm
I'll have
happy
to come back.
I'm happy to defer on that. It wasn't my
Okay.
intent to put you on site. Could you explain for me what the difference between a violence category is versus struck and struck by?
Sure. Somebody's out in the playground and a student kicks a ball that hits somebody in the back. That wouldn't be considered to be violent, compared to the student doing the same thing but with intention to cause injury.
Okay.
Did you have another question before I move on? And we can do several rounds, so perhaps maybe just one more.
Yeah,
And then
I'm happy to take a break, Chair.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much. Nissa, thanks for your patience. Go ahead, and then Trustee Kwan after that.
Thank you. And through the chair, just on behalf of the VC PAC, wanted to express support for this initiative in tracking occupational health and safety concerns in schools, particularly violence, given that the VC PAC has requested more data on these kinds of incidents across our school community. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I had several questions as well, but I think the first one I was hoping to get answers to was just a little more information on a refusal of unsafe work. So do we have numbers on perhaps how many refusals we had last year compared to this year? And then also if you could just kind of walk us through kind of what the steps for a refusal of work kind of looks like, and what kind of forms need to be filled out, how are those done, that kind of thing. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, Trustee Kwan. Suffice to say, the numbers are extremely, extremely small. Like we're talking, less than a handful. The process is, so the expectation is that you perform your work unless it is unsafe to do so. And if you feel that it is unsafe, then you bring it to the attention of your supervisor. So in this case, if it was a teacher, they would bring it to the attention of administration. The expectation is then that the circumstance would be reviewed. So in the school-based system, it would be the administrator with the school-based team. They would call in, if necessary, my staff. So my manager of OHS would go over and support that conversation, and a representative of the employee would be there as well in our models. And it really comes down to, and if it's called for, then WorkSafe will send an officer to the meeting as well. So that's where you have the official process starting, and it's reviewed in terms of what happened, what caused the concern, had the employer, for example, in our case, was there a safety plan in place? Was it being followed? So there's that review of the supports to make sure that there was an awareness. So we have an EA who's new to the class. Were they given the opportunity to review documents in advance? So that process takes place, and then at the end of it, the officer goes away, reflects on what information was provided, and then comes back and says yes or no. So that's the kind of the long and short of it.
Trustee
May I
Kwan, did you have a
follow up?
follow-up? And then,
I did, yeah.
go.
And so just with the outcome of a refusal of work, and if that is approved, let's say by WorkSafe, then I'm assuming that's a WorkSafe claim that would be different. How does that differ, let's say, from a disability claim or something like that? If if it's a teacher who is it's in a stressful situation, but it's maybe not doesn't qualify as a refusal of work, would that be where they would kind of look for perhaps a disability or an extended leave in a different way?
I'm not sure I follow the question. Perhaps you could reframe it.
Certainly. So I'm assuming we have a very small handful, as you said, of refusal to work, and it would be a WorkSafe claim if you were refusing to work. I'm assuming that's what would happen if you were in that situation as a worker. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So let's say that it didn't qualify as a refusal of work, but the teacher is, let's say, or EA or other support worker is in an unsafe or stressful situation. We're seeing, more leaves and that kind of thing happen as well, as far as that goes. So I would assume that would be a different avenue, and that would be separate from a refusal of work. Is that correct?
So to be clear, employees at any time can raise concerns over the working conditions. And in many cases, that's resolved by the administrator and the employees. And we have, obviously involvement at times from the early learning team. And that may result in a student receiving additional supports, for example, or it may be that the EA is relocated to a different class if that's the outcome that's deemed to be appropriate. So we try to look at all options to ensure that the students are supported, but at the same time, employees are supported as well. I'm trying, and I apologize, I don't have the information in front of me, but my recollection is even last year, I don't think we actually had, if we had any, it would have been one approved unsafe work claim, if I'm not mistaken. So while there may be occasions where WorkSafe comes out because of a concern, it's generally resolved. There's not actually, it's not deemed to be an unsafe situation.
Gotcha. So we wouldn't see kind of a secondary if it's not refusal of work
No.
of some other leave. And in
No.
fact, we would be solving it in another way.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate
Yep.
the clarification.
Yep.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Trustee Painter, would you mind if I just circle back to two of our partners who are waiting, and then I'll come back to you just because you had an opportunity to, okay. I'll come back to you. So next, Cindy, go ahead when you're ready, and then Nissa, and then Trustee Painter. Go ahead.
I was just going to respond to Karen's question about the steps for refusal for unsafe work, if that's okay. From a GVTA perspective, there are actually 3 steps to it. So the initial refusal of unsafe work, you let your administrator know, and then they work together to see if there's a worker safety plan, student support plan, and they work together on modifying it together. And then once they're happy, or at least modifications have been made, then they go through with the job. And there's the second step, if they find that that's still not, if they still don't feel that they're safe and they can refuse it for the second time, then that involves HR with Rob, typically Rob coming in, and also like the health and safety rep. And then they look at the plans together again, make modifications, and they do their little investigation, and then they implement the plan that is created together. And then the third step is if the worker still feels that is unsafe, then WorkSafe is brought in.
Thank you very much, Cindy, for sharing that GVTA perspective and process. Appreciate that. And Director Knissen, just to clarify, is the process impacted by the various sort of collective agreement commitments, or is this something where there's a standard district process and everybody knows what that is? It's communicated to everybody. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the process Cindy has described is more detailed, but certainly that is the process. It's the creation of an awareness, and then trying to resolve the issue before we have to escalate it to WorkSafe. That's always the best model.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, Nissa, thanks for your patience. Go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. And through the chair, here I'm approaching occupational health and safety from my experience working in the natural resource sector, but also familiarity with the WorkSafe BC regulations. It's my understanding that as of August 2022, there needed to be written notification by the employer if it was determined that the work could continue even if that employee was not going to, like if the task was going to shift to a new employee. And I'm just wondering how that fits in with the process with the GVTA members, because that seems to me that there would be documentation associated with that where, where a task had been determined or a situation had been determined to be a risk to the employee. And then in order to go back to work in that situation, there would need to be a written documentation of what changes had been made or how it was determined it was safe for the work to continue with another employee in that situation.
Thank you very much, Director.
Yes, you're correct.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole process is, at the end of the day, we use as our key indicators are the the worker safety plan, as well as the student safety plan. And those 2 documents are fairly robust. And as Cindy mentioned, they get updated as required to ensure anybody who's coming to the school has that opportunity to quickly get up to speed on what is the expectation in whatever that issue may be that is happening in that classroom, so that people have the opportunity to be prepared and informed.
Right, thank you so much.
Thanks, Nessa. Okay, Trustee Painter, go ahead. Thanks for your patience.
Thanks very much. First question is that how is this information shared out? Like, does this go back to the school level JOSH committees, for example? Do they get regular updates on these stats?
Yep. It also goes to the District Occupational Health and Safety Committee as well.
Okay, that's great. Good. Yeah. Just wanted to know that we're working in an integrated model. Not a surprise, but reassuring. I think you touched on it with the beta testing of the VPP tool. There's a subcommittee that meets to work on this one. Is it meeting on a regular basis?
They were meeting on a regular basis when the VPP was initially launched. And then once that objective was met, then they've reduced their meetings. I believe there is a meeting scheduled in the not too distant future to review how the beta version has been adopted. And then from that, what's the strategy for rolling out more broadly?
Okay.
It's a subcommittee of the District Occupational Health and Safety Committee.
Yeah. And I'm mindful that although we are integrated and share information as much as possible, that there are some silos simply because of WorkSafe legislation and such. So I was just trying to understand what we're doing to take this information to inform our practices. And I know that's sort of outside of scope for you, Director, but one of the things that when I looked at the numbers and recognizing that stats, and we had this, not you and I, but the board's had this conversation more broadly, that numbers are numbers, and that it's the meaning behind the numbers that are really useful, that this is good for flagging things and getting us to focus attention. But when I looked at the report, and it indicated that 75% of the VPP reports were coming from 10 schools. And I did the basic math, and that was over 180 reports in that year, which seems really high. And recognizing that they're not all the same, can you give us a bit of a breakdown of what things are considered in looking at that and trying to take that from a number on a form into what's going on in our schools and what we can do to actually address it? Because I think first and foremost, with Maslow's hierarchy, if we're not safe, then nothing else really works. So for both our staff and our students, we need to make sure that we're providing their safety at the outset.
Just to clarify then, Trustee Painter, you're asking for the director to provide an example of what a violent incident would look like at a school level?
No, because I'm sorry, I'll try to clarify a bit, because that's not what I was intending. I'm trying to understand how we're actually taking this information and doing something with it to either understand or to improve, ideally, the situation for all involved.
Yep. No, I think it's a great question, and that's the conundrum. I mean, it's nice that people are using the app, but if we don't do anything with it, it's actually, just information. It's data. It's not of very much value, and so I think the focusing on what it helped us do was to focus where the concerns are arising. So we've identified that quite significantly. It's coming from the 10 schools. And that's allowed us to, for example, when we're doing our call outs to assign EA support, we look at those schools first. We say, are they in need today? Because they're the ones that are going to probably benefit most from getting some resources added to that. I know that Sean and Nadine and Jesse and the team, they look at those schools and in a way to better direct resources. It's part of the plans, and the funding model goes to support those schools. So it certainly helps in terms of identifying where we need to focus our efforts. The addition to the beta version of the app was really to say, okay, now that rather than just reporting this, can you help us, because you're at the front line, can you tell us, is this a change in behavior? Has this student's baseline changed? Because that's information that the school-based team can immediately work with and better support the teacher and the EA and the student. So we're trying to do more than just gather data, but rather use it towards in impacting our supports for those high need schools.
Thank you very much, Director. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted, but I didn't. One that kind of spurred from something that you had mentioned, Director Knudsen, was with regards to I guess it was, I think we had a presentation from them last year, the subcommittee of the Occupational Health and Safety, which was the VPP subcommittee, I believe, and that one of their main objectives was kind of what we're doing now with the tracking. Is that correct? It was well, first of all, I think we should say a big thank you to everyone who is on that occupational health and safety, as well as the subcommittee, because it sounds like it's a great step forward and a really great program. And, working collaboratively with educational partners is fantastic as well. So it sounds like we got some good outcomes from that committee. So I was just wondering, as far as with the incidents that we're still tracking, the app is, working well, and we're seeing kind of the trends that are happening. As far as whether that subcommittee can still be tasked with, they gave us a great presentation on some of the things that they would like to see or do in the district, and I wondered if we're still kind of pursuing that.
Well, Cindy is on my screen anyway, sitting right next to me. So maybe if the chair is okay, I can ask Cindy to provide her perspective as a member of that subcommittee.
Sure thing. Thank you, Director. Yeah, Cindy, go ahead.
Well, the members of our VPP committee has changed a little bit due to changing in roles in the union, and Jessie Moore, from what I understand, is no longer on the committee, and is Sean McCartney has taken her place, and we haven't actually really met to talk about some of the changes and programs or like ideas that we had to try to mitigate violence in our schools. So whenever that meeting is, I hope we talk about that.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like priority work for sure. Director, did you want to add anything before I move on? I think to Trustee McNally and then to Trustee Kwan, if that's okay. Just keeping in mind that Trustee McNally haven't had a turn yet. Director, did you want to add anything? No? Okay. Trustee McNally and then Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to follow up on Cindy's summary of what's been going on. I hope it's not improper for me to ask who is in charge of calling the meeting, because it seems like it's always a critical issue. We've heard from parents, we've heard from teachers, we've heard, I don't know, from which other officials. I don't want to name a group that hasn't presented to us, but we've certainly heard enough to believe that, violence in the schools amongst student population or population, student and teacher, is a huge concern. So
So
that's a comment. And the question is, yeah, who should call the meeting? Maybe it should happen soon.
Director, go ahead.
So it's my office that calls the meeting. To be quite candid, the buck stops here. I just want to caution that the subcommittee is, the fact that the subcommittee has not met in the last while doesn't mean that activities are not going on. In fact, I would suggest that it's on our agenda every day in everything we do. It's the major driver, right through from our recruiting of EAs, training, working with Sean and his team around, assigning, working with QB 947 around how best to support EAs and Cindy and others through the district occupational health and safety committee. So that said, there is a role for the subcommittee to play, and it's with the restructuring now. I apologize. I had forgotten that there was 2 members changed out on that group. So I think it is probably timely to get everybody back. The expectation was that we were going to run the current updated app through to the end of this first half of the school year, and from that point, then see where we could improve on the launch and rollout of that updated version. So a sooner meeting, sure, we could certainly move towards that.
Thank you, Director. Trustee McNally, you had a follow-up?
Yes, I just would like to follow up with a question, which so this is a subcommittee of occupational health and safety.
Mhm.
That's what I'm understanding. And I haven't been to an occupational health and safety meeting for a very long time. And a long time ago when Trustee Noor and I went, the meeting was canceled and we were told to leave. So I don't know too much about that committee, but I see that there's a subcommittee developed, and if I could just hear which organizations reps are on it, I'd appreciate that. And before I hear that, if I can, I just want to stress that so much of what we're dealing with is due to inadequate funding for more personnel, for more teachers, for more EAs. So I know the funders are not listening, but I have to say that.
Thank you, Trustee McNally. Yeah, absolutely. I think you probably get a lot of agreement around this table and others about that. Director, would you mind just reminding us which employee groups are represented on that committee?
Yeah, 947 and the GBTA.
Thank you very much. Okay, Trustee Kwan, thanks for your patience. Go ahead.
You're on mute.
Again, my mouse is not clicking the way I wanted to. I just actually wanted to switch gears a little bit, and this may not even be something you can answer, Director, so I apologize if I'm asking the wrong person. But I was just, we know this app is really great. So happy to see it in place. And I just wondered, we hear a lot from, public, especially our parents out there, with not just student to teacher incidents, but also student to student incidents. And I wondered if we have any plans to kind of do any tracking in that regard as well. Or if we already do it, I'm not sure.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Director, is that something you can answer? Perhaps I'll turn to the superintendent.
That's out of my ballpark. I think I would defer to the superintendent to respond.
Yeah, thank you. Superintendent?
Yeah, thank you. And through the chair, we do not have any intention or plan to capture this. I can tell you from historical work, both in a school as well as from here, that information that's captured is very subjective. It's very human resource dependent, and it does not provide us with accurate, reliable, or valid data. I think there are other ways that we can and do find out information, and as Director Knudsen said, this conversation is probably daily on how we reach out and support schools. But collecting that information, I think we would find very many of our staff in rooms writing down this information rather than being in classrooms supporting students. And that is a significant concern when we don't have enough, that we'd be asking people to be during their work hours capturing data. So I would not, from a superintendent's or educational perspective, advocate for that, but I certainly am happy to discuss in a future meeting areas that we can focus on and should.
Thank you, Superintendent. Just to clarify though, if there's an incident involving students, so that again, outside of the scope of this report, because we're focused here on worker safety, but if there's an incident involving a student to student interaction that ends up being violent in some way, presumably the records are kept and safety plans are implemented as appropriate if that is appropriate in the context of the situation. So we're not saying we don't keep any records, we're just saying we are currently not reporting in the same way as we're talking about this evening with reference to the app. So I just want to clarify the records we keep, because I don't want people to have an impression that we don't keep any records of incidents involving student to student violence.
Yeah, I want to be clear. First of all, the definition of violence is vast and varied. And so when it's put out there, I want to make sure that we have a common understanding, which we don't yet, to be honest. When it is appropriate, we absolutely keep records. But a potential incident on a playground that one person would deem inappropriate, another person would deem an age-appropriate interaction, and someone else would say it was violent, that's where we get into it being very difficult to track and very difficult to capture. But absolutely, yes, I don't want to mislead that we do not keep information when it is of the significance that it needs to be captured.
Fair enough. No, thank you for the clarification. I think that's helpful. Trustee McNally, and then I want to turn us to a discussion of data. So Trustee McNally, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly agree with the difficulties of defining what violence is, and people's perceptions vary. But we have heard incidents where the behavior of a student has escalated to the point where the rest of the class has to leave the classroom while the situation de-escalates, and that is something that is quantifiable and doesn't require definition. So I wonder if we are tracking those incidents.
Superintendent?
Thank you. Again, I think it's important to understand that within a school, information like that would be captured. From a district level, we would not. And there are varying reasons why a school would keep that information. And again, we want to make sure that we're looking at it from a strength-based piece, not a deficit, which I'm not suggesting you're suggesting otherwise, but that also the information we captured is secure and private. And so it's hard to identify exactly what we do for each incident because they're each individual incidents. And so when there is a reason to have students leave a classroom so that another student can be de-escalate and have their own space. The classroom teacher would work with the school-based team and or the principal, vice principal to make sure that that was understood as to what happened so that we can work on plans to mitigate that, or that we're aware of antecedents so that we try to avoid that happening again. But the record keeping would be one we would want to maintain in a private, confidential manner, and we're not depicting a student in a less than strength-based way. So it's captured for the reasons we need to capture it, and potentially not for other reasons or for things that don't need to be written down.
Thank you, Superintendent. Trustee Mag, did you have a follow-up? No, okay. Thank you very much. And your virtual hand is still up, if you wouldn't mind lowering it. If you just hit the reactions again, and oh, you got it. Perfect. Okay, so I wanted just to turn us to a conversation about data in the report, and in particular data that we've been talking about related to student to teacher incidents. And I'm wondering, Director, if you could give us a bit more of some, context, and or maybe perhaps the superintendent can assist with this, about what we mean when we say student to teacher incidents. Clearly, we're very much committed to acknowledging that students incidents involving students is very much a reflection of their developmental age, and also behavior demonstrates like it's communication to us, right? It's telling us something about the needs of the student, which we want to keep at the core of this discussion. But it would be helpful, I think, for the board to understand what we mean when we say student to teacher incidents.
So just to clarify, it's not student to teacher, it is student to SD 61 employee, which could very well be an EA. And the challenge, and I think the superintendent has alluded to, is you tell me your definition and I'll tell you if I agree. The app doesn't make any assumptions. It just allows you to, if you feel that a violent incident has occurred or was potentially about to occur, you have that complete authority to record that. That's the value it gives. It doesn't put any judgment on trying to meet a definition. The challenge then is when that data comes in is how do we take one person's version versus somebody else and say, okay, well, they're apples to apples. And that's really one of the main pushes to this beta version. Is it's, as I understand it, I'll be honest, I'm a layperson when it comes to this topic, but my understanding is that it's when what has changed? Why has that student behaved? Or is it something new that's happened that the student is behaving in the way that would require the adult to make a report? And helping to understand what was going on at what time of day, for example, did that change happen? That then allows the school-based team to work with the EA and the teacher around, okay, maybe we do need to change the safety plan because of the trigger is the 10:30 bell. Whenever the 10:30 bell goes off, we get this action happening. That's a change in the behavior of that student. So that's the value of layering in this change around behavior. I see Cindy's jumping in, and I appreciate Cindy being right next to me on my screen because Cindy lives with this every day. So if Chair, you're okay, I would welcome Cindy's thoughts as well.
Yeah, no, sounds great. Thank you, Director. And Cindy, feel free to share your perspective as well.
I'm just going to talk about the beta version of the Form 1s. One thing that's a big change that is great is there's a space where it says, are you aware if there is a worker safety plan or not? And if there is, it now gives, there's a free-form space where it gives EAs and teachers suggestions as to what they think would be best to support that student, where that wasn't there before. And in a lot of cases in the past, the people who work closely and the most with that student was never consulted. So in this way, it gives opportunity for feedback and support for that student, which is fantastic, because it points towards changes toward the student support plan and the worker safety plan. And it's, you know, with the increasing numbers, it's complicated. Each situation is complicated. It also points to the lack of, well, how other support systems outside the education system aren't doing very well, like healthcare, and how parents are sometimes on wait lists for a long time to get a psych ed support or medical support, and that impacts how students act because they don't know, they don't have that support at home. And so, and that's, I feel this is why this is increasing the PACS, the former PACS. What am I trying to say? I'm starting to ramble, but there's a lot of, it's complicated and each situation is different. And so, yeah, I think I'll just stop there before I ramble more.
No, that was very helpful, actually. Yeah, I think we can all kind of relate to that, to the struggle of other support systems in our community, not also being able to react either with enough resource or with the right resource at the right time to properly support all families and all children. So, yeah.
And certainly the, you know, looking at the data over a longitudinal perspective allows us to better see where these triggering events are, and that allows for better planning to support the student and the worker as well. So the fact is, we're only, I think, you know, while it may be a little bit longer for some schools, really it's only 2 to 3 years for most schools to be using the app. So as somebody once told me, 2 data points does not a trend line make. So I think we do need to run it and continue to run it and use it as simply, it's one tool. It's one tool to help planning supports.
Director, are we able to pull more data? Because certainly when I looked at this, I started to think more about some of the work that the board has just assigned to the Equity Ad Hoc Committee and around identifying inequities, like structural inequities within our own like school district environment. And I started to think, okay, well, you know, are we able to, like, in terms of the incidents being focused at, you know, a relatively small number of elementary schools, are we able to provide further context and data that might help the work of the board and the Equity Ad Hoc Committee, just in terms of like drilling down on into a school by school data set? So for instance, understanding you know, the profile of the students concerned. You know, is there a designation? What kind of supports are in place? Are there IEPs? Are those up to date? You know, are students on wait lists for assessments or other supports? Is there a difference between English and French track and incidents arising in between the dual track schools? So, or at certain grade levels. So what other data could be harnessed or utilized that might help us in our work, and in particular with the work that we just assigned to the Equity Ad Hoc Committee? And so perhaps this is not just for the director, but also for the superintendent.
I'll defer to the superintendent if I may.
Superintendent Whitten. So I guess just a question about data and also a question about how that data could be utilized to help support some of the work the board has assigned to the Equity Ad Hoc Committee.
I think this would be a question that would be better taken away, because I think between this, which is a VPP program, which is a WorkSafe requirement, we would be needing to look at the actual app and the beta to see what data can come from it. So I don't think it's a question that can be answered specifically this evening. And I'm also mindful of not trying to jump into the work of the equity committee and presuppose what work they're or conversations that they're having. So happy to take it away and connect with director and also with the inclusive learning department to see what current data we capture and what information may be helpful to that equity committee.
Thank you, Superintendent. I think that there surely is a concern about having access to data in a timely fashion. So perhaps we could come back to this with some insight, or perhaps we need to look at a motion just so it's clear what it is we're asking for. But I'll look to my colleagues if you have any thoughts around that. We do have a deadline, and so this work is sort of directly related to the work that we're trying to do as a board in terms of identifying inequities and putting in place both clear strategies to address them. This happens to be coming up in the context of worker safety, but obviously there's an overlap, as we've discussed tonight, with student supports and so on. So yeah, I guess it would be nice to be able to utilize the data that we're already collecting in order to help us in our analysis of how to address some of these inequities. I think it's very important, obviously, to acknowledge that there is a relatively small group of schools where the vast majority of incidents are arising. And so that is an opportunity now that we've identified that trend, in order to dig into some of the detail and help us identify some solutions. Trustees, do we want to articulate what data it is that we are looking for and when we might want that provided in light of the work that we want to see happen by December? Or do we want to wait until I think the next opportunity to talk about this kind of data and the overlap with that work would be in at Ed Policy in November. So looking for some thoughts and direction. Yeah, Trustee Kwan.
I'm just thinking that perhaps maybe it might be a good thing to bring back to Ed Policy. I think we have some expertise on that committee too with regards to this. That's my first thought. Having said that, it can't hurt to have a discussion at every possible opportunity, I think, just to get, as many of our partners and staff, to kind of hear different insights and perspectives as well. So I don't know if that helps.
No, it does. Yeah, I mean that would be the alternative. Would be to direct something at Policy in November. Though I think the problem is that then that wouldn't be approved by the board until the end of November, and the board has asked for the work to be completed by December. So timing wise, I'm just concerned. I mean, the other thing we can look to do is maybe to have some discussions about what data is available, what that could look like, and then bring a motion to the board, just directly to the board on Monday. That would be the other option. Okay, any further thoughts? And so perhaps we can have some discussions offline and see what we can come up with in terms of direction for the board meeting on Monday. Director, I just want to say thank you very much for the report. You see the report growing and evolving over the years since 2020 when the board directed that this report be put together every year. We are really keen to see trends, and we love the fact that you're kind of connecting the work back to actions, to again that solution-oriented approach to sort of how do we improve the system, both for the benefit of our workers in this case, but also for obviously our students who are at the core of everything we do. So thank you so much for including that as a lens in your report tonight. It's appreciated.
Well, thank you very much, and I just I would be remiss in signing off without first thanking the GVTA and both CUPE unions for their support in making what we're trying to do happen, because it's not something that can be just driven by HR and the employer. It has to be everybody working together. So I appreciate everybody's ongoing support in these areas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director. Yeah, love to see all the good collaboration happening. So thank you, everybody. And thanks for the dialogue tonight. Okay, so we're going to move us along to E. This is our finance and legal affairs. First up is under E1. This is the budget development process for 2025-2026. Secretary Treasurer Stride, I'm going to turn the floor over to you to present your motion whenever you're ready.
Great. Thank you,
Your
Chair.
memo, not your motion. Although
Yeah.
there might be a motion at the end, your memo, whenever
Yes.
you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, in the agenda package this evening, I have included a draft 2025-2026 budget development process for discussion this evening, with the hopes to receive any feedback that can be brought forward to the board for approval next week. It has been drafted with reflection on the feedback that was received, the survey that we did at the end of the budget process last year, and also the feedback that was received at the September 23rd board meeting. I didn't receive any additional feedback after that meeting. I know it was fairly late at that point, so I've done my best to put forward something with some changes from last year. And so I'll just highlight what the changes are and then can have a discussion. So the first section in there is connections meetings. And one thing that we're proposing for next year is to expand those meetings out to include the middle schools. One other thing too is perhaps to share the purpose of the meeting and even a standard set of questions. So doesn't have to be leading, but just sort of standard set of questions of things that we would like to hear from students around their priorities. Provide that to the school-based facilitator in advance of the meeting so that they have a sense of why we're there and can be better prepared to provide some information. The partner and VP-VPA meetings, not proposing any changes to that. We had 3 different events last year. The student symposium was one of them. Most of the discussion at that event was on like topics, important topics that they discussed. And then at the end, there was a budget simulation. We've discussed the possibility of eliminating this particular event and having 2 student forums. Last year, there was 1 forum, and that's where the students can engage in discussion on those important topics that are kind of a little bit outside, tied to budget, but outside of in-depth budget discussion. And then we could gather the budget-related feedback from the students through the student connection meetings. So that's one of the reasons for expanding it out to capture middle and secondary. And also we have a group that we meet with monthly, the Representative Advisory Council of Students, who are representatives of the students in each of the secondary schools. The Talking Tables event, proposing that we actually eliminate that event and capture budget-related feedback through the partner connection meetings and also through the regular budget updates at either board meetings or standing committee meetings. And also engaging in an in-person budget consultation meeting. So the public budget consultation meeting wouldn't just be for public. So last year we focused specifically on the public. This meeting we're thinking would be in person, but we would expand the purpose of the meeting to engage with representatives from 4 houses, all of our partner groups, staff, students, trustees, and the public. So it would be a broader, more diverse group. We would like to schedule that earlier in March to allow more time for more feedback and advocacy prior to budget deliberations in April. And the thought is that if we have fewer scheduled events, that we might be able to encourage higher participation at one key event. And regarding communication, looking to launch a budget priorities survey at the start of the budget process, and that would encompass all of those groups that I just mentioned. And the purpose of that would be to identify areas of priority for the 25-26 budget, but also identify areas of exploration. So this is a request that there would be more opportunity for honest, anonymous feedback. So we put that out there and we can get people putting ideas forward that they might not necessarily put forward at, in a public meeting. Yeah, and then we would take that feedback and then initiate discussions, hopefully a bit earlier in the process, so that we're not leaving things right to the very end and being rushed and not having the time to discuss with people who are important to include in those discussions. So we would continue to do the budget development process feedback survey at the end. Probably would look to see the feedback that we got last year to try to improve the information that we're getting from those questions and also the accessibility of the survey. And media releases we could continue to do following board meetings if there's anything that the board would like to share out. And I think we're getting to the end here. Advisory to the board, budget working groups is what we did last year. Proposal is to eliminate the budget working groups that were set up and to use that survey to generate areas of exploration. District staff can provide both qualitative and quantitative data and information on those areas. Also can generate areas for exploration directly from the board if there's interest. And all of this information can be presented at board meetings, but we can also expand that out to the standing committee. So operations committee, if we want to have a greater discussion, or if the topics are relevant to any of the ad hoc committees, we could move that discussion into ad hoc committees, which would have broad representation. Indigenous Education Council. So in the process, I've added in all of the meetings that have been scheduled during the budget process timeline so that we're just aware of when those meetings are occurring and just thinking about the timing when information can be shared from the Indigenous Education Council to the board. And lastly, there are a number of timing considerations that have been built into this draft. We do have to have the staffing packages to schools by Friday, April 11th. HR and financial services needs at least 2 days to get those ready after we have any approved budget changes. And so the latest date that the 25-26 annual budget could be approved is April 9th, which is a Wednesday. It's really tight. Last year we did Tuesday, Thursday for the 2 meetings. This year we would need to do Tuesday, Wednesday, so they would be back to back. But the hope is that if we can start this early enough that by the time we get to budget deliberations on April 8th, we're already in a really good place. And yeah, it's my last comment. So all potential budget options should be discussed and impacts on schools considered well in advance of budget deliberations. So just put that out there now for your further feedback. If there's any comments you have, any suggestions for changes.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Secretary Treasurer. Appreciate that. I'm going to open the floor to some questions and discussion. Trustee Painter, you had your hand up, I think, first, and then Nissa.
Thank you, Chair. I'll come back to a request that I've presented in the past, and I feel very strongly about, is that if we actually want to have informed participation by not only by the trustees, but by all of our educational partners, then and rights holders, we need to identify what potential measures we are considering for managing any budget shortfalls at the outset, at the very start of the process, so that when we have these conversations, we can have people providing their feedback on the specific measures that we are considering. Going to school cash online was a late breaker last term, and we could easily, if we had identified that at the start, we could have gathered feedback, and it might not have changed our decision, but we would have been more informed about why we were making that decision versus reducing custodial time or altering funding for specific programs. We need to have that all out on the table at the start, so that when we go forward, we're actually talking on the same page about the issues. I would go so far as to say that we probably need options totaling about 150% of any projected shortfalls. And that is to be able to provide everyone around here with an ability to prioritize which ones they think make good sense to cut, where we absolutely need to retain funding. If we simply meet our funding or our shortfall, our expectation, it leaves us with no flexibility to consider alternatives. So that's the big thing. The other thing is that when we meet with partner groups, we have to have a very comprehensive way of either providing really solid information well in advance so that these partner groups can actually caucus internally and provide feedback on behalf of the party. If we have single meetings, that means that whoever's in the room at the time is then burdened with the responsibility of representing everyone in their organization. And that's simply unfair and it's unreasonable. It's not reflective of basic democratic process. So if we're having one meeting, there has to be an opportunity to provide really comprehensive information well in advance so that these groups can meet separately, ask questions, provide feedback, and then come to the meeting fully informed so they can actually provide an assessment. Or we have to have multiple meetings with sufficient time in between for these groups to be able to provide feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Lisa, go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. And through the chair, one comment about having, I believe there was a suggestion for the online opportunity to provide feedback, and there was an emphasis on that being anonymous. And I would like to suggest that that is an option, but there should, I think, also be the option for groups or individuals to indicate where they're coming from with the information, because that providing that accessibility online potentially will surface particular groups or individuals that would be impacted, that the board or the staff would otherwise not be aware of. So I think it's great to provide the online feedback option. I just think that the feedback shouldn't be default anonymous. I think there should be an opportunity for people providing feedback to put their name and potentially indicate, what's informing the feedback that they are providing.
Thank you very much. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Got it this time. Okay. Yeah, I think I just want to echo Trustee Painter's comments. you know, with regards to when I was looking through kind of the budget feedback from last year, two things that really stood out to me that I was hoping we'd see a little bit more of was, you know, true engagement around the issues that we're facing when we're approving the budget. So, you know, last year when we went through the budget process, you know, something like the fees for the online payments wasn't included in some of those discussions, and then was, you know, during when the budget actually came and we started kind of our meetings. And so you know, having some of those items ahead of time, that, you know, it just feels a little more transparent. It gives people a little bit more time to kind of absorb and you know, figure out whether there's other options, that kind of thing. And I think that kind of transferred over. I saw kind of the same level of comments from students around kind of the budget simulation, and they wanted to see, you know, real, true items that we were facing when they were doing their budget simulation as well. And I do kind of see here that we've maybe done away with the budget simulation unless we're going to include it somewhere else. But I know that was really a highlight for students last year, especially the ones at the table I was sitting at, that's what they were waiting for. They were very excited about going through that. So just wondered if that was still a plan in somehow to incorporate in with some of the student engagements that we have here.
Thanks, Trustee Kwan. Secretary Treasurer, would you mind just clarifying whether we're going to have some kind of other student engagement opportunity that would include something like a budget simulation?
We haven't discussed building that into anything. I don't know how that would work with the Student Connections meeting. I know we have had in the past in the public meeting sort of scenarios and prioritization. I think one of the pieces of feedback that I sort of took away from that was it felt a bit repetitive, and it is really hard to use real, like we are using real things, but they're not like real to the budget decisions that are being made. And so I guess we could try to figure out a way that we could bring them the real decisions that we're contemplating. And in my mind, I was thinking perhaps the representative group of students might be a good place to bring that initially, and then they could take that back out. But then we're seeking information from them, or what are their priorities. It's hard when you're doing a simulation because you're giving them options for them to prioritize, but you're not getting information from them on maybe other things that we haven't necessarily put on the list for them to prioritize. So maybe a combination of both, but I don't think we have our mind set one way or the other. So this is why we're having this conversation, to see if that is important to the board to have the simulation, how we might be able to incorporate that.
Trustee Kwan, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah, and I appreciate you putting this all together. I think it's great. And one, you know, I tend to be an ideas person and not really think through, oh, how would that actually work? But one thought was perhaps maybe that budget simulation doesn't actually have to take place at some kind of student engagement with trustees. Maybe it happens in their schools, and maybe that's something they want to take on, almost like we do the student elections before the election happens, you know, that kind of thing. Maybe it's something that schools or even classes want to do. And with that in mind, that might be a little bit easier to do kind of in that period after we get, you know, we have an idea of what things might, you know, we might be looking at to change in the budget. And that might be an easier way to kind of bring it. I don't have all the answers, but it was just the thought I had.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. No, great idea. Going back to the comment initially from Trustee Painter, and then also from Trustee Kwan around having the proposed budget solidified and provided as soon as possible to all partners. And you know, not just proposed reductions, but also proposed investments. So where we're looking perhaps to reallocate or invest more, like for instance, on some of our priority areas and initiatives, really making that very clear as soon as possible at the outset, providing more options. So like for the board, but also again for our partners to comment on and provide feedback again as soon as possible. When it comes to reducing some opportunities or maybe doing them differently, I personally am open to those ideas. I think from my perspective, I'm just keen not to reduce the opportunity for the board to hear from more than just a handful of, say, student reps, or like in particular, I'm most concerned about limiting the board's opportunity to hear from as many students as possible. More than confident in our staff representatives to speak on behalf of their members, but just concerned that we don't lose sight of the opportunity to speak to more students. And with that said, the student connections were really important, and them expanding them to middle school, I think is a great idea. I would like to see us build on some of the key themes that came out of those meetings at the secondary level, so that we don't lose sight of those. And so we can see and get some feedback on, have we moved the dial on any of the concerns that the students raised? So for instance, Secretary Treasurer, when you mentioned that, we might want to be a little bit more coordinated and clear about the purpose of the connections, I think it's a great idea. All I'm suggesting is that perhaps we also say, look, last year we heard these key things come out from all 7 of our high schools. Are we moving the dial on any of those things? Have those things improved? I mean, we heard, for instance, about network access and connectivity, Wi-Fi access, those kinds of things. Have your concerns changed? Has that improved? Is this still a concern and that you want to see the board invest more on? If we can get some trends over time, if we continue to do that, I think it would be very, very helpful. The other thing around that is, again, just wanting to reach as many students as possible. I think the idea of a survey is another good tool for doing that. Perhaps we want to give some time in class to allow students some space to participate in those surveys. So again, if we're targeting middle and high school, I don't know if there's an appropriate class that they're all taking where we might provide a little bit of time for them to participate in the survey so we can get more views from more students. That's the other thing. I guess the only other thing that I would say is in terms of the getting rid of the working groups. I think that's fine. I think they've sort of served their purpose. I hope that we can figure out a way to talk more about things like ratios. So the kind of internal, allocations that we use, and ask some more specific questions from our educational partners about the impacts of those allocations. I know we haven't looked at ratios for quite some time. And so perhaps if we're not going to take time, meeting in working groups, and we're going to primarily use meetings and larger forums to get input, that we want to take that time to ask some specific questions about our ratios and our allocations. Any other thoughts in terms of the memo? Things that we want to see, want to suggest might be, changed or looked at in terms of what's in here? Perhaps longer, I guess, maybe longer sessions. So again, if we're going to reduce the number of different events, perhaps we want to look again to the duration. Certainly, I think we had about an hour, I believe, for student connections. Maybe we want to increase that time and open it up to more students. I'm not sure exactly how each school identifies the students that would participate. But anything we can do to increase accessibility and provide a little more time. We had barely enough time to hear from all students. It was quite rushed. So if, again, this is going to be a core part of how we get information and feedback from students, perhaps we want to carve out some more time to do that. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Trustee Painter, go ahead.
I was just thinking that over the course of the year, staff have provided some excellent budget resources. For example, and I apologize for not recalling the name, but the follow-up report that we just received through the audit committee, was it last month? I guess it has to have been since it's only October. But that was an excellent report, and it was clear, and it covered a lot of the different elements in the budget. So I would really urge us, as much as possible, making use of the existing resources, so we're not putting additional burdens on staff, but making sure that we have good comprehensive information available at the outset, and make that available to anyone who's interested, to try to provide as much background as possible about the key issues, what are the main drivers, how we spend money now, what are our priorities, etc. So,
Thank you, Trustee Painter. The only thing to really highlight is the fact that, it looks like we're going to be in a much better situation than we were during our previous budget deliberations. And so I think that'll mean a bit of a change in our mindset. And just in terms of looking at, okay, what are there opportunities to reinvest or to reallocate, to really invest in certain priority areas, or reinvest in things that perhaps we had to reduce. So yeah. Anything else, any other feedback that we want to provide to the Secretary Treasurer? And then we do have a recommended motion. I'm not sure if we're ready to move that, because I think maybe one more iteration that perhaps to the board, so that at the board meeting, if that's possible, Secretary Treasurer, or whenever you think it's possible to bring, taking into account, giving you an opportunity to kind of redraft the proposal based on some of the feedback that you've heard tonight. Would that work for you, Secretary Treasurer? And again, I'm at the committee's disposal. So if you want to move a motion tonight, and we think we can based on the feedback and where we're at, then let me know. Secretary Treasurer, what are your thoughts on that?
I think I'm gonna have to reflect on the feedback to see what it is that needs to be changed. I've heard a few things that we could tweak to what's already on there, but if there is something very specific that you think needs to be changed, I would you can just let me know. Because I hear people reiterating that we need to have the information up front, and I think that's the plan. I don't know if you just want to see that sort of reflected, when information is coming, within the plan, is just a little bit more detail. The survey, I've written the feedback down around the survey. A lot of it is around possibly the budget simulation, I guess, or some sort of a similar action.
Would it be
Yeah.
helpful to go item by item? So just looking at just the changes you're proposing, and then give you some further direction. I think my sense is that because the board's just sort of looking at this for the first time tonight, or over the weekend and this evening, that perhaps an opportunity at the board meeting to give you specific direction in light of the feedback that you've heard might be a better process. Unless, again, my colleagues feel like they're ready to give you specific direction, in which case then we can move a motion. But do you mind if I just pause for a second and just acknowledge Nissa and go? Yeah, thanks, Secretary Treasurer. Nissa, go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. And through the chair, I think one of the things that I didn't hear in the recap there, and something that I think is very important as a partner organization, is the maximum amount of time to try and digest this information. We're not experts over here. We might be parents, which makes us experts in some respects, but not when it comes to school district budgets. So having time to sit with the information and as was highlighted in the discussion, go to our our groups that we're trying to build consensus among and identify what the key issues are, is really, really important. And it feels like we have more meaningful participation and can bring better discussion points or more informed suggestions if we have that time.
Thanks, Nissa. No, that's really helpful. Yeah, and presumably if we have less events, that will give staff some more time to undertake some of that earlier kind of information gathering and providing it to us earlier. Secretary Treasurer, so are you happy for us to look at this again at the board and then maybe provide you with any further direction that the board wants to in terms of the process and what you've recommended this evening there?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay.
The discussion was what I was looking forward to, and like I said, I will reflect on that to see if there's any tweaks that I can make, and look forward to receiving feedback next week.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Appreciate you bringing that forward. Okay, I'm going to move us on our agenda. We're at E2. This is the student device ratios update. And this, I understand, also falls to the Secretary Treasurer. So whenever you're ready.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just due to the short notice, I'll just provide an update on student device ratio. So as you're aware, IT presented an update on student devices at the September 23rd board meeting. And within that presentation, they provided an overview of the current state and timeline for completion for this particular project. So I'll just provide kind of a brief update from what has occurred since that presentation. What I can share is that the disabling and decommissioning of devices that are no longer secure is now at 95% complete. And IT staff are assessing inventory at all schools. They are expecting to have that work completed by the end of this week. And at this point, given what they have counted, are aware that we are going to require additional funding in order to reach the board approved device ratios. So they were going on their best estimate of what devices were in schools, and they're finding that the number of devices that are actually in schools were lower. They are gonna, once they finish the count, we'll submit a proposal for our review in early November so that we can get devices purchased as quickly as possible. And the other key thing is that there's still, because the process is still underway, we're still in the process of getting the devices up to the approved ratio. And then once we're at that point, then we need that time that's been presented there to kind of pause and assess what those ratios mean for schools, and obtaining feedback from them around how the ratio as approved is impacting the teachers, EAs, and students in the classroom. So themes that are already emerging as this work is underway is what is the best way to support students with IEPs and students who are English language learners. We're seeing that we need to consider the device type in the ratio and also by grade level. So we're finding that there are some imbalances in schools between iPads and Chromebooks, for example. And because we are still in this process, we put a pause on the use of all alternative funds until all the schools are up to board approved ratio and we're able to discuss things like pedagogy and what the optimal ratio would be moving forward. And then at that point, we will need to receive feedback on how we might be able to incorporate alternative funding into our future purchases. But the process at this point just needs to play out as planned and just allow time for appropriate assessment. So that's the update. I don't know if I'll be able to answer any questions, but I'm sure there are some.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And thank you very much for providing an update. I realize we asked for it at short notice, and so thanks so much for providing it. I know we do have some questions, and Trustee Painter, do you want to kick us off?
So is it possible to get a very basic understanding of what is going on in our schools right now? What I'm getting out of this is that items that were vulnerable to external hacking and other challenges were no longer being supported, have been withdrawn. So they're not available in schools, but we're not looking at replacing them probably for quite some time yet. And I have significant concerns about the timeline, simply because of the transition to online resources. It seems to me that there's a lot of staff out there, a lot of teachers and educators of other sorts who have modeled their, huge parts of their curriculum delivery to having these devices. And if we don't have them, I'm trying to understand what the alternatives are. Are we going back to printing everything out on paper? Like, what is the alternative? And then what other resources, whether we hire additional short-term staff or whatever else it takes to get this work done as expeditiously as possible so that we can get these resources back in the schools.
Thanks, Trustee Painter. Secretary Treasurer, is there any kind of context or anything that you want to offer in light of Trustee Painter's comments and questions?
This is a massive undertaking that IT has taken on with their existing staff, and it's also impacting or has impacted facilities as well with the recycling of devices. I realize that it might feel like an urgent situation in the school if you don't have enough devices, but they are working as hard as they can to try to get this done and have accomplished a huge amount of work in order to get here at this point. I don't think they fully understood the inventory in the schools. We just need to take the time to get an accurate inventory count. All of this work is really important for us in moving forward.
Trustee Painter, you had a follow-up, and then I'll go to Nissa.
I have nothing but respect for our staff, and there's no question in my mind that they're working as fast as possible. But the scenario that's presented to me, and this is where I was asked some clarification about what is going on in the absence of these devices, is it looks like we're going pretty much half the school year without having the devices available to our educators or students. And that's critical. That's a crisis in my mind, that we should be looking at trying to funnel additional resources, whether that's staff resources or whatever else, to try to reduce that timeline. I don't believe that simply moving along at our existing capacity is an appropriate response. And I would love more information. If there's something I'm missing, please let me know.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Secretary Treasurer, is there anything else you want to add before I move on to Nissa? Sorry, Secretary Treasurer, I just missed. There's nothing else? Okay, thank you. Nissa, go ahead.
Thank you, Trustee Duncan. Through the chair, at the end of the update, the last bullet was a direction is requested on the following, and the last bullet was approval or denial for the use of alternative funding sources for student device purchases. Examples include parent advisory councils, funding, school-based budgets, grants, missions, etc. Something I would like to surface to this standing committee is that VCPAC has had a number of discussions where parents have expressed concern about raising funds for devices that are used in the classroom, as once these devices are purchased and are in use, they generally get treated as SD61 assets, and then their deployment and their use is not subject to PAC oversight at that point, but the PAC is the community, so parents have raised that money and want to see it invested in their schools, and there's been some discussion about for equity concerns moving devices around the schools. But that becomes a situation where one school community would be potentially, through the PAC fundraising, subsidizing the broader school community, which I believe that's what our tax base is meant to do. Anyway, so that's been a concern because of perceived inequities or situations where school communities are disincentivized to contribute because of these resources being moved around the district. It's a contentious topic. There's a lot of opinions out there, and so I would just like to flag that to this committee that thinking about parent advisory councils as a source of funding to alleviate this issue, even in the short term. Observations coming out of the pandemic where there was a push to, get more devices to enable online learning, and then not having devices replaced and having PACs being asked to contribute to fill the gap, even in the short term, is leading to a lot of concern amongst the parent community.
Thank you very much, Nissa. Secretary Treasurer, is there anything you wanted to add or offer on that subject now?
The only thing I'll comment on is at this point, there haven't been any devices transferred between schools. So only the unsecure devices have been removed. There has been discussion about how we might address the imbalance between iPads and Chromebooks. So we have talked about that, but at this point, no devices have been moved between schools, as far as I'm aware.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer, and thank you, Nissa, for sharing that perspective as well. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate Nissa on behalf of VC PAC sharing perspectives and insights that you've heard from your members. I think it definitely is it is a philosophical question, and it is a question that I think many of us have either discussed or mulled over on our own. I certainly understand where both or all perspectives of where parents and parent advisory committees might be coming from. Basically, in my perspective, I think a full transparency of if a PAC wants to give money to a school for devices, what the expectations of that would be. It is probably the best way moving forward of if a PAC wanted to give money for devices, laying out beforehand what the expectations of purchasing those devices would look like. I think that cuts down on a lot of a PAC may decide they want to use their money for something else. I think just being upfront about how that money or the devices, regardless of how that donation comes through, and how those are going to be used beforehand, is a good it's a good way to do business, for lack of a better word. I think really we have to get there. So we don't have that clarity yet, and I think that's something that we as a district need to determine. So just some food for thought.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Yeah, there definitely is an underlying, I think what's become complex is that there is this underlying inventory management, concern or issue or matter that needs to be addressed. I think that perhaps wasn't anticipated going into the work. And again, Secretary Treasurer, you can correct me if I'm wrong in my understanding or in my impression from the materials that we've been provided so far. My concern is that we, obviously get our inventory levels, first of all, agree what our inventory is, since obviously we all need to know that from a asset management perspective, but also if we want to ensure any kind of level of equity or, you know, being smart about the type of procurement we do from school to school to make sure, as you point out, that the needs at each level are being addressed properly, then, you know, that work's very important. And I know that everybody's working as hard as they can to get there. But I think it just highlights how important the technology is to the classroom environment. And my hope is that on the back of this difficult work, that we are in a much better position to both manage our inventory moving forward, to make smart procurement choices, and then to make some decisions in short order about things like PAC fundraising and the purchasing of technology and what the rules will be around that. The board, I know, is very keen to ensure some equity. And so, you know, we have to kind of acknowledge that when, you know, some PACs are a better place than other PACs to raise significant funds and to start to really potentially increase the student device ratio at their school. And that does create inequities in terms of access to technology at our other schools. And so we do have to be very thoughtful about how we move forward, because we don't want to end up there again. I think the other thing is that when something like a device is purchased in a public educational setting, it's no longer the fundraiser's, you know, asset. It becomes the school district's asset, because we have to manage it from a data security perspective, but also from a replacement perspective. And I think that's the other thing that we haven't really touched on tonight, is the difficulty that, you know, additional external funding poses for a public organization like ours, where we aren't necessarily in a position to replace that technology that might have been originally fundraised by a PAC, especially if we get beyond the ratios that you know, we settle on in the end. So I think when you do come forward with feedback about the ratios set by the board, again, those ratios, the board's understanding was that those ratios would just bring us back to what we were doing kind of before the pandemic and before all that extra federal and provincial funding started to stream in that really increased our ratios. But at the end of the day, what we want to know is, from a procurement and financial perspective, what can we afford, right, to maintain moving forward? And then also from an educational perspective, at each level, what makes sense in terms of use of technology in classrooms? And we as a board don't have those answers. We're very much relying on our staff and partners around the table to give us advice so that we can, in the end, settle on the appropriate ratios for each level. I think it's really great in intel to get that at certain levels, the type of procurement, whether that's an iPad or a Chromebook, really needs to be looked at so that students are getting the most benefit out of what we invest in. But I would hate to think that we're going to seek feedback from folks before they've had an opportunity to be up to full ratio with the appropriate type of technology that is needed for their school for a while, so they can kind of get a sense of, does this work? And then I guess the only other thing I would add is just going back to some of the questions in your memo, Secretary Treasurer, and I believe that they were on page 17 of the pack up. So let me just double check that. I want to make sure I'm directing folks to the right. No, I think it's further down, might be page 18. Let me just get my bearings here. So yeah, at the bottom of page 18 of the pack up, you indicated that there's direction is requested for the following. So in addressing equity needs for students with IEPs and students who are English language learners. I think, you know, if we need direction about that, I would be pretty confident that the board could give that direction very quickly. I mean, we certainly, you know, and again, my colleagues can correct me if I'm speaking here, but you know, I think the board's expectation is that students with IEPs or English language learners that have certain requirements in terms of devices and access to devices, that those would be met immediately, that we would be ensuring that those needs are met immediately, that there wouldn't be a delay. And so I wanted to unpack that a little bit and just get your perspective, Secretary Treasurer. Are we looking at a situation where students with IEPs and English language learners are not having access to technology?
Sorry if I may, through the chair.
Please do.
Thank you. I think what we're trying to do right now is ensure that students who have that in their IEP or the ELL or multi-language learners have access to a device. And as we're working through this, we may be hearing from some schools that they have concerns that some of their students don't. So we are triaging, we're working with Principal Hovis as well as Principal McCartney to make sure that we have devices in the hands of students who need them the most. And so that is a day-to-day conversation that we're connecting ITL with inclusive learning and ELL. So I think we are in hand in that, but it is an ongoing process and an ongoing conversation.
Okay, thank you, Superintendent. That's good to know. Okay, and then I think the other thing was, again, looking at page 18 and the direction that's being sought, we touched on this. And so again, this idea of approval or denial of the use of alternative funding sources for student device purchases, and a parent advisory council funding or school-paced budgets or grant submissions were examples. And so I'm assuming that we need to be giving this direction rather soon, because I imagine that there are already grant proposals being written and fundraising being done or already having been done. And so perhaps there's an opportunity again to seek some feedback from our representatives around our various board tables, and have some recommendations come forward from staff sooner rather than later, so that we can get something in place. In the short term, I understand, Secretary Treasurer, that we're just sort of rejecting those kinds of opportunities. Is there a way for us to allow folks to do some of that, with the caveat that we won't be able to guarantee how it's allocated, because our goal is to have equity amongst our schools, and that equity, piece is based on, our assessment of both what we can afford to keep up and also what is best for classroom learning.
Yeah, we have had conversations around what the impact might be to open the gates for alternative funding right now. And I think it's just really important that we don't allow for purchasing that will put us into a ratio that's beyond what the board has approved, or else we won't be able to understand what the true impact is. We have talked about what would happen if PACs could provide funding for their school to bring them up to that ratio. This also talked about that in expediting the process. Again, we'd have to have a conversation with IT about how that would impact the work that they're doing, and if that would just muddy the waters and make it more difficult for them. So I can't really answer that exactly. I think we just have to hold off a bit longer until they finish some more of the work that they're doing.
And just to clarify, Secretary Treasurer, you're thinking that work is going to be done sooner than they anticipated. It's like they were projecting, I think, November, and you're saying that by the end of this month. Did I hear that correctly, that they're hoping to have it done, or is it still into November?
They'll have the inventory count done probably by the end of this week. But we are short funding, so we would have to procure. They've already used all the budget that was left and the carry forward to replenish what they could. And it looks like, based on their preliminary counts, and we won't know for sure until the end of this week, that we're going to need to purchase more. So I think the hope is that we would be able to do that in early November and get them as quickly as possible into schools. Once those devices are in place, that's the time where we would be able to see how that's impacting schools and receive feedback.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. Nissa, go ahead when you're ready. Sorry, you're muted.
Okay, there we go. Through the chair. Hopefully not muted now. A question and then potentially a request is, has this consideration around wanting to ensure that the school district has a level of devices that they can sustain and maintain. Has that been communicated out via school administrations to the parent advisory councils, like as a sort of broad messaging around this? And if not, is there a possibility of that being communicated out? Just the you know, from my notes here, wanting to return device levels in school district 61 to levels that can be sustained over time and that are informed by teaching outcomes and use of technology and various other things. Because I think part of the feedback we're getting is there's differing levels of understanding of what's driving these decisions. And while VCPAC really wants to be an advocate and be a good source of information, we are a parent advisory group. We're not necessarily the source of authoritative information on how the district is making decisions and the operational constraints and considerations. So I guess my question is, has that been communicated out to the school administrations for communication to their parent communities? And if not, could it be? Because I think that could go a long way to be proactive around managing expectations when PACs are thinking about raising funds, because we all want to have our students have access to things that we think benefit their education, but opinions on what that is and what that looks like can differ quite wildly across our learning community.
Thank you, Nissa. Secretary Treasurer, can you clarify the nature of the communications that have gone out so far about this?
Yeah, I am aware that there has been a fair amount of communication to administrators in schools. What I'm not sure about is further communication from there out to parent communities. So we can definitely take that back, and if that isn't happening or hasn't happened at all schools, and we can certainly make sure that that message is received.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay, any other final thoughts or contributions tonight about this? It is super important. We all, I think, could agree. And so hopefully in the end, we get to where we can sustain and where we're all kind of united in our view of what is needed. Okay, I'm going to move us along in our pack up. We are now at E3. This is crossing guard services from the District of Saanich. And again, Secretary Treasurer, your voice is going to get tired after tonight because a lot of these items are yours. But once again, the floor is yours when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've just included some information in this agenda package. It's tied to the motion that is under new business. And the motion was discussed at the last ops meeting with a request for some information. And so one thing I will first highlight is that the board did approve a motion during the budget process to write a letter to the District of Saanich and request that they would fully fund all of the crossing guard services provided in the municipality. The board sent a letter to Mayor and Council on May 1st. What I have found out, because I did reach out to the District of Saanich just to clarify some of the information that I put into this memo, is the first that staff had seen the letter. So that was on October 15th. And they were able to confirm that due to an administrative error at the District of Saanich, then the letter was never received by Mayor and Council. At this point, I don't believe they have seen it. They were planning to share it with them as soon as possible, along with an update on the conversations that we've been having. So, yeah, so I put that there because I think Trustee Painter's motion is sort of picking up on the fact that we didn't receive a response from them, and perhaps going back to them to get more information from them. They haven't really had an opportunity to see the letter or provide a response at this point. I did provide some of the information I think that was requested some general information there around the school crossing guards policy that's in place in the District of Saanich. They use a crosswalk hazard rating formula. It's a point-based system that's based on a number of different factors, including pedestrian vehicle volumes, road width, traffic speed, and also the complexity of the intersection. And there is a threshold for funding. And so if you're looking at a non-signalized intersection or crosswalk, 800 points is the minimum and 1,200 for signalized. Higher for signalized because that would be the highest level of safety that they could incorporate in an automatic setting. District of Saanich funding, we do have 5 schools where we do receive funding for intersections. The District of Saanich has been funding at 50%. When I did speak to them, I think they are open to conversation around funding, depending on what other municipalities are doing. So I stay hopeful that perhaps we could see some additional funding from that side. However, there are 7 schools that we provide crossing guard services at. We started providing services at those schools in 2022, 2023, when the Greater Victoria Crossing Guard Association ceased to operate. And that's when the school district took on providing the services with our EAs. And for those schools, the school district pays 100% of those costs. So we receive no funding from the District of Saanich. It's just under 93,000 estimated for the current year. One of the questions I was asked and was answered in the last meeting was the total funding that we've received from the District of Saanich, when would it run out? So we actually invoice them a couple times a year and we apply it as 50% funding across the whole year. But if we were to front load total funding against our costs, we would run out of funding partway through November 1st. In the memo is also a table that shows all of the unfunded intersections. And you can see there are, I think, 3 intersections that they've identified they will review. So they're going to undertake that work. And the rest of them that are deemed ineligible. The other piece of information that was requested is if we're not receiving funding, or if these intersections are not deemed eligible for funding by the District of Saanich, what are the reasons? Like, what's the rationale for why we're providing crossing guard services there? So the only way we thought we could get that information is to reach out directly to the principals of the schools. And so you'll see a series of anecdotal information from them around the intersections and why they feel it's crossing guards are needed at those intersections. So my recommendation, I think, at this point, given the fact that District of Saanich Mayor and Council hasn't seen the letter or had an opportunity to respond, is we may want to hold off on putting the second motion forward until we receive a response from them.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. I imagine we're going to have quite a few questions, but I really appreciate you putting together the additional information and seeking some insights from the respective school principals. That it was very, very helpful. Perhaps we can just turn to the table in the pack-up on page 20. Because it sets out, as the Secretary Treasurer mentioned, which intersections have been deemed by the District of Saanich to be ineligible, which will be reviewed. There's a number of intersections that are ineligible according to their criteria. Secretary Treasurer, could you just clarify for us, if you know this, in advance of your meetings with their staff, when they're undertaking this analysis, do they loop in or include us as a school district in their decision making? Are we asked, what our thoughts are about the level of safety against the criteria that they apply? Because we have a unique perspective, obviously, to share, and certainly that comes across very strongly when you look at the comments provided by each of the principals.
I can't speak to the scope of the work that they do, but I know that that they do go on site at the schools to do their review of the intersections. So I'm not totally sure how much information they're receiving from the school itself. I can share that I did provide them with the anecdotal information from the schools, as it's public information at this point. So they could see the perspectives of the schools and the reason why we are funding crossing guards at those particular locations. I will say that I don't think myself, I don't have a good sense of where crossing guards should or shouldn't be from an educational perspective. And so I think it is important, if we have an opportunity to meet with the District of Saanich, to be able to share that perspective with them. I think they are a little bit tied because this is a policy of the District of Saanich. And so their funding threshold is based on the eligibility of those eligibility thresholds that are in their policy. And so I don't know how much they're able to move around that at this point. I haven't seen any flexibility in funding intersections that don't meet those thresholds, but they have offered to meet with us to have some conversations around this and answer questions. So I think that would be a really good question to ask.
Yeah, and perhaps they could provide us with, if they haven't already done so, their scores and their analysis for each intersection, so that we can properly, I think, express our concerns and provide our school-based observations about the nature of safety. Yeah, go ahead, Secretary Treasurer.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we do have some of the point scores, but again, we're getting into the details of their work and work that is from probably an engineering perspective that is really challenging for us to understand why one intersection is 472 and another is 261. So we had that conversation actually this week about how useful that information would be to us and to our schools. And so just kind of left that out. But I don't know if you think that would be helpful. I think it would be worthwhile to have a conversation with them about the process that they use, and in getting those points might be a better place to start.
Yeah, no, I think that would be super helpful, because you're looking at some of the criteria that they use to assess and determine the points, the total points, very much has to do with things that we have, obviously the principals have views on, so it might be a good place to start. Trustee Painter, thanks for your patience. Go ahead.
Yeah, try not to dwell on points I've already raised before. I certainly agree that given that the district has not received the first letter, that a second letter that I had proposed is perhaps not warranted at this point in time. I'm happy to withdraw that from consideration at this time. I do think this is a matter where we need to be very clear cut about what our mandate is and what the mandate of the municipality is under the Motor Vehicle Act. Road crossing safety is the municipality's responsibility. I did note that there's a number of cases where we have crossings on school property that are deemed hazardous and requiring crossing guards. And I certainly will support the continued funding there, but only with the expectation that our facilities staff is actively investigating those things, those specific points, and determining what can be done from a facilities perspective to make those safe. They're going to be a hazard all day long when our kids are coming to and from school. So it's not simply enough to have a crossing guard during peak periods. I noticed one, Northridge Elementary was on the list. So I had a look at Google Maps. Sure enough, we're having students walk across from Kerry Road coming onto the grounds, and they're crossing right across the drop-off lane. So maybe the first thing we need to do is put a monstrous elevated crosswalk in there that effectively will act as a speed bump and oblige anyone on that lane to drop to like maximum 5 kilometers an hour to safely transect the crosswalk. I'm not the engineer, happy to defer, but we can't allow what we recognize as hazardous situations to remain on our own school property. That's separate and distinct. I'll drop there.
Thank you, Trustee Painter, appreciate it. I think the only other thing from this memo, Secretary Treasurer and Superintendent as well, is just what kind of reach outs have we done to Saanich Police about some of the excessive speed that the principals have highlighted. So, you know, that wouldn't be either us or the municipality, that would very much be Saanich Police Department. And perhaps we can, you know, reach out if we haven't already to say, look, we're really experiencing excessive speed at certain times of day. And we would really appreciate it if you looked at resourcing and some additional traffic patrols in and around schools at certain times of day, and just make the request to them. Okay, folks, anything else around this memo before I move us on? Okay, so that brings us to our monthly financial report for September. Secretary Treasurer, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. So the monthly financial report can be found on page 26 of the agenda package. This is the report for the month of September. The prior year numbers were what was reported at ops in the prior year, and the September numbers were run after month end. So the budget that's reflected here is our annual or preliminary budget plus any changes that have been made since then. I'll just note that the budget also now includes all of the carry forward from the prior year. So if you recall, in August, the department budget carry forwards were not in there yet. The actuals for this report are from July 1st to September 30th. If we take a look at the revenue, and the percentage column reflects the amount of revenue that was budgeted but not yet received. Current year, we're at 81%, which is the same as the prior year. One thing I will note is that the surplus from prior year in September 2023 was not adjusted yet in September, but you'll see that adjusted in October. And if you're looking at the total expense, and the percentage column for that is the amount of expense budget that is still available to spend. We're currently at 86%, and that's the same as the prior year. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have on that.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. Does anybody have any questions in relation to that report? Okay, if not, Secretary Treasurer, whenever you're ready, do you want to move on to the next report, the budget change report?
Great, thank you. Moving on to the budget change report for September. This is on page 29 of the agenda package. This report highlights all revenue and larger expense changes to the budget. So if we start with the operating budget and look at the changes amended budget section, you'll just see an in and an out of 6,000. There's a correction to busing invoice. We had noted that it was school district, but it was actually to a third party that wasn't a school district, and we code them differently. We received a $4,000 donation from the Saanich Firefighters Charitable Foundation. We received other donations and miscellaneous revenue of $12,000. There was an adjustment of $3,000 to the meal support program for SD 62. So we no longer have a contract with the vendor. And then you can see cafeteria revenues of $13,000 that were added. In the special purpose fund, there were no changes from the previous month. And there were some changes regarding the interest in the capital fund. $82 on the local capital and 22,000 on ministry restricted. And that's it for that report. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Folks, do we have any questions for the Secretary Treasurer? Okay, I'm going to move us along. We are now under F, Facilities Planning. Our first item is school access. And that I believe, Secretary Treasurer, will you remind me, is it Marnie, is it your memo? Yeah, okay. Welcome to our Director of Facilities, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, no, I was asked to provide an update, so the memo's in the packet.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Trustees, do we want to ask any particular questions around this? I think we wanted to get, we were starting to hear more and more from our learning community around access to our buildings, and so we wanted to get a sense of where things are. I know that it's a bit of a work in progress because there are some items and approaches that are being reviewed. And so is there anything that you wish to highlight from the memo, or in particular that you think that we should be aware of? Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually just had a quick question, and it just jumped out at me, so I thought I'd ask. It was really around, thank you for putting that table together at the bottom of the memo with regards to concerns, and one of them was just staff going into places that had just been cleaned, or we had floor finishes, increasing risk of exposure to asbestos, that kind of thing. And I just wondered if that has increased, and if that is the reason we made the decision, or part, I mean, not the only reason, but one of the reasons that we made the decision, or is that just kind of a byproduct of making the decision that now we can reduce that because we don't have access the way it used to be? Does that make sense? Am I phrasing that the right way?
Director, do you understand the question, or do you want Trustee Kwan to rephrase it?
No, I think I understand the question. By decreasing the access a bit, we're able to do more of our asbestos without having to have more concerns. We let a lot of our asbestos contractors in when times when we know the teachers aren't going to be there, and on the weekends we let them in as well, and let the principals know so the staff are aware. So we try and risk that exposure, or minimize the exposure, not risk it, sorry. Being late.
Yeah, no worries. And so then with the floor finishes, is that kind of the same thing? Like we try to do it then around when there won't be as much traffic. Is that really why that's in there? Okay.
Yeah, a lot of the floor finishes happen summertime. So having the staff out in summertime is very beneficial. We're able to do large quantities without little feet or big feet walking past.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions in relation to the memo? All right, it's there for your information, and thank you very much to the director for putting it together for us this evening. The next item on our agenda is around Sundance Bank Elementary School Learning Studio, and again, it's an update. Now, Secretary Treasurer Stride, is there anything from this memo that you wish to highlight for the board?
I'm actually going to pass it over to Director Vistison Harwood to answer the question, as she has direct knowledge, and so I'll pass it over to her.
Sounds good, thank you.
Yeah, so good news. We're nearing the end. We received the building permit on last Friday, so I think that's October 17th. Same day we paid the fees and the schedules were submitted to the city. We did reach out to them. It takes them about a half a day to review, so we reached out to them this morning. And we have scheduled the walkthrough with the building inspector and the fire department. That's scheduled for October 29th. That was the first day they could provide. So we're getting closer to the end of this.
Thank you very much to the director. And I know that we're also layering in an additional communication, which hopefully will help just the parent community be kept up to date on the current state of play. All right. Any other questions or comments in relation to that memo before I move us along? Yeah, Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious about timelines, and I'm what is the normal turnover for this kind of thing, where we get kind of a sorry, my brain, it's late, occupancy, that's the word I'm looking for. And I just wondered, like, was there any way to anticipate, like, taking this long and, you know, making other arrangements for classes? Like, I'm not sure, you know, kind of why the timeline took so long, and whether it was anticipated, or like, does the city of Victoria tend to take this long, or?
Thank you, Trustee Kwan.
Sorry. Every project is a little bit different. This had a development variance permit that happened at the very, very front of it, which took a little bit longer. So we had to deal with lot lines and different setbacks. And so that probably took an extra 3 months. So I can't really, I mean, the city of Victoria tries to prioritize the school district work. They always, you know, they obviously have other priorities as well. So this is just a project that's taking as fast as it will take.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Trustee Kwan, for the question. Okay, but good news overall that we're almost there. I think the learning community will be very happy about that. The next thing on our agenda tonight is under F3. This is the operations report for October. Director, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I'll just leave it there for your guys' reviewing if you have any questions, since we're getting near the end.
It sounds good. I know it's getting late. Thanks everybody for hanging in there. I know everyone's had a long day. And we have a long agenda, but lots of important items. And so trustees and partners, if you have any questions around the operations report for the month, please let me know. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
All right, I feel like I should be apologizing. Everyone just wants to go home. I was just curious with the vandalism report, and again, really appreciate that that's been added to your report every month. Are any of those things tied together? Like, is it the same building where a number of these things had to happen, or are we seeing this kind of across the board?
There are definitely some schools that have higher vandalism than others that we're trying to address. I prefer not to mention them publicly. But as far as like the external windows and stuff, they get hit randomly. There's no rhyme or reason for it. Same as the exterior graffiti and stuff. Some schools get hit bad some week and others are worse the next week. So
thank you, Director. Thanks, Trustee Kwan. I just wanted to acknowledge the over 900 work orders completed in all maintenance trades this month. Wow, that's incredible, that number. So a huge thank you to the director and all of your staff who are obviously working so hard to get through so many work orders. That's a huge feat. So thank you. Just want to acknowledge that. And also really interested to see, and thanks for including the inclusive projects on your monthly update. I think it's really great for the board to get a sense of our focus on that and the resources that are being allocated to address those inclusive projects throughout the year. So again, thank you for that. Do we have a specific budget that your team can draw on for those kinds of projects, or is that all done within the existing budget?
So that is mainly done through Sean McCartney's inclusive budget. When it starts to run out, we do have a little bit of a budget in AFG, and some of the projects that are bigger, like the paving projects, we do put into AFG, and we kind of put aside money for that every single year because we never know what's going to come down. So there's little pots we can draw off of.
Thank you. Trustee Kwan, you had a question? Go ahead.
All right, a couple more questions. First of all, with the new BC Transit bus passes, I wondered how those, if you can kind of just walk us through how that system works. Is it similar to like a post-secondary bus pass or even a Youth Victoria bus pass where it can be used at any time? It kind of sounds like they need to be reloaded, so it's a reload kind of thing. And do we monitor whether it's being, like, when it's being used? Can they only use it for to and from school, or is there certain times? Or just curious about that.
Here's my understanding. I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'll correct you, or I'll correct myself next meeting. My understanding is it's a bus pass that we can load, and we are able to monitor. The students can use them whenever they want throughout the month. We don't. It's not just for school. If they get on the bus, they can go wherever they want. We can kind of monitor who's not using it as much and not load that card as much. I don't know if it's tied to an actual physical student or if it's tied to the actual physical school.
Okay. Amazing, thank you. And last question, it was around the climate and energy and the continuous optimization of building automation systems. In particular, that second bullet, you have investigations at Arbutus, Esquimalt, Rock Heights, Northridge, and Willows. And I just wondered if those were randomly chosen, or if they were chosen for certain reasons, or.
Good questions. I'm sure with Brian, he chose them for excellent reasons. They're probably high energy consumers and he's looking for something, but I don't know the answer to that. How's that?
I mean, it would make sense, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just have one more question about this, because I just really am always interested in our technology side of things. The update to some of the legacy switches and wireless access points. Do we have like it sounds like it's a district-wide initiative, which is great to hear. Are we getting any feedback so far from schools about increased connectivity and access to uninterrupted access, I should say, from a learning environment perspective?
We definitely hear from the learning environment when there is problems with the access. The NCIS team actually has a little bit of tool where they can walk the hallways and see where the worst sites are. So that's kind of how they make their decision. I know that they speak often with the school admin at different schools to get their feedback and stuff. I just don't know if I don't have more of an update than that.
No, that's fine. That's great. Yeah, no, we're just looking for some positive news, because we know that you guys do hear about it. And so we're really happy to see that those upgrades are happening. So thank you. Okay, I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to move us along. Thank you very much to the director for your report. Much appreciated. We are now at Cedar Hill report. So Cedar Hill, what's happening?
Under a minute. It's on schedule still, so that's good. So good news. The interior metal stud installation is complete. The mechanical and electrical installations continuing and will be continuing for months. So you'll hear me say that often. The team's starting on the exterior masonry outside, so it's starting to look more like a building. The gym roof is complete and the other roofs are finishing up just in time for the rainy season. Gregory Place curb and gutter is complete, and Cedar Hill Road is now, in my understanding, open, but Cindy might be able to correct me if that's not right. It's open, so that's good. But it's definitely progressing.
Great news. Thank you very much. That sounds like significant progress. So that is exciting. Trustee Kwan, you had a question. Go ahead.
Probably groaning because I have my hand up again. All right. From what I hear, and Cindy, good thing you're here too. I hear actually Cedar Hill has got 24 divisions this year, but I think the new school is 21 classrooms. I know we've discussed a few options, and I just wondered, if funding doesn't come through in time or we don't get the building upgraded for the number of divisions, what kind of is the plan moving forward for where we would house students?
Good question, Trustee Kwan. I'm not sure who to direct the question to, whether it's a combination of the director, superintendent, secretary, treasurer, or just the team. Do we have any updates we can provide? Associate Superintendent Arts, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you to the chair. Our belief is that we will be able to accommodate the students that are projected to come to the school next year. And so the new build is for 575 students, and we believe that we will be under that. But we won't know until the time when everyone comes. It will be, but that is what our projections indicate.
Okay, thank you very much. I imagine we might have to have some creative, flexible use space. Be interesting. I'm always marvel at the planning that is undertaken to make these things work. You had a follow-up, Trustee Kwan?
Yeah, actually, just a thought that came to me is if we open the new building and we perhaps have some students, is there a possibility of delaying the what do you call it, demolition of the old building, so that perhaps the safe areas of the school or the safer areas of the school could be used if we need extra classes? Like I'm just kind of thinking out of the box here, but I don't know.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Has there been any consideration of using the safer blocks of the existing school in order to help us with that transition into the new build? And again, I'm not sure who is best to answer that, or whether anyone can answer it, but if there's any thoughts you want to share about that observation, then yeah, go ahead.
I can speak just from a budget perspective. If we delay the demo, it will cost the project more money. So keep that in mind, that it will be extra dollars that I don't know where we'll get from. So that would be a big question back to the board where that money will come from.
No, that's great for us to know that there would be added costs associated with delaying demo. Thank you, Director. Trustee Painter, go ahead.
Just trying to remember the 575 capacity. That was after we received the approval for the additional classroom build that was over and above the initial Cedar Hill. Well, didn't we get authorization for like an additional 4 classrooms that were going to be added on the back?
No. Sorry, the 575 is just for the current school that's being built. The extra 4 classrooms were in the 5-year capital plan as an addition for 4 classrooms that has not been approved.
Okay, thank you for that.
But it's on the capital plan, so we're hopeful. Okay, if there's no other questions around F4, I'm going to move us on. There are no public disclosure of in-camera items tonight. We had one item under new business. Trustee Painter, I know you indicated that you were happy to withdraw it in light of the conversations that are going to be occurring staff to staff, and in light of the fact that the mayor and council didn't receive the letter I wrote on behalf of the board in May. And is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so we can consider that withdrawn. We have no notice of motion, no general announcements, unless someone wants to correct me. All right, so that brings us to a motion to adjourn. Trustees, may I have the motion to adjourn? Thank you, Trustee Kwan. All those in favor with a show of hands? And that is unanimous. Thank you, everybody. Take good care. See you soon.